The day started like any other, but little did I know it would end with my world turned upside down. I was in my room, flipping through pages of an old leather-bound book, a collection of John Calvin's writings. It was a gift from my grandfather, a man who had always been fascinated by the depths of theology. But as I read, the words began to pierce through my usual teenage distractions, revealing a truth that was both unsettling and profound. Calvin, a theologian from the 16th century, had a way of speaking about the human condition that was both brutally honest and deeply empathetic. He believed that our nature, from the moment of our creation, was flawed. He used terms like lipitudo, blearedness, and hebitudo, sluggishness, to describe how our minds and hearts are clouded and slow to understand the divine. It was as if we were walking through life with blurred vision, unable to fully grasp the beauty and majesty of God. But it wasn't just about our intellectual limitations. Calvin argued that our very nature was so marred by sin that we could not even seek God on our own. This idea hit me hard. It was a stark reminder that despite all our achievements and advancements, there was a fundamental brokenness in us that we couldn't fix. It was a humbling thought, one that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me. As I read further, I came across a passage where Calvin commented on Psalm chapter 78, verse 59-60. He wrote, "God, it is true, fills both heaven and earth, but as we cannot attain to that infinite height to which he is exalted, in descending among us by the exercise of his power and grace, he approaches as near to us as he will bear." This idea of God stooping down to our level, accommodating himself to our human capacity, was both comforting and challenging. It suggested that God was not distant or unreachable, but was actively involved in our lives, even in our brokenness. The more I read, the more I realized that Calvin's view of the human condition was not just a philosophical concept, but a lived reality. He saw the struggle and the pain of human existence and acknowledged that it was part of our nature. But he also believed that God's grace was sufficient to overcome our limitations. This was a powerful message, one that resonated deep within me. Calvin's writings also delved into the concept of the image of God in humanity. He argued that the image of God in man is spiritual, and that the proper seat of the image is in the soul. This meant that being made in God's image was not about physical attributes or gender, but about the spiritual essence of who we are. Calvin never equated the image of God with male gender, which was a significant point in a world where gender roles were often rigidly defined. As I closed the book, my mind was racing with thoughts and questions. Calvin's ideas were challenging, but they were also deeply hopeful. They reminded me that no matter how broken we might be, there is always a way forward through the grace of God. The day ended with a sense of renewed purpose. I realized that understanding the human condition, as Calvin saw it, was not about wallowing in our flaws, but about recognizing our need for God and finding hope in His grace. It was a journey I was just beginning, and I knew it would be a lifelong one, but I was ready to take the first step. Throughout the pages of this book, we've explored the deep and nuanced ways in which God is described in the Bible, particularly through the use of metaphors. We've seen that these metaphors are not just poetic devices, but are essential for understanding the nature of God and our relationship with the divine. One of the most striking aspects of these metaphors is how they often use images of motherhood and nurturing. For example, Elizabeth E. Meyer points out that when God is described in feminine terms, it brings to mind the intimate and life-giving actions of carrying a child in the womb, giving birth and nursing. These images help us understand God's deep caring and nurturing love for us. However, Ochtmeyer also warns that if we see God as entirely part of creation, we risk making everything divine, which can lead to a kind of self-godhood. This is a delicate balance, and we need to be careful not to lose sight of God's transcendence. John Calvin, a key figure in Christian theology, often used these nurturing images to describe God's love. In his commentary on Isaiah and Matthew, Calvin emphasizes how God's use of such tender metaphors helps us feel God's loving care. He writes that when Jesus speaks of gathering his people like a hen gathers her chicks, it shows God's maternal kindness. This image is meant to inspire us to trust in God's protection and to respond with gratitude and obedience. However, Calvin is also careful to point out that God's fatherhood is not based on human fatherhood. Instead, it is grounded in God's relationship with Jesus Christ. Through our adoption as God's children, we are given a special status that is rooted in God's initiative, not in our human efforts or understanding. Theologians like Donald Blowish remind us that the way we understand God must always begin with God's self-revelation in Jesus Christ as recorded in the Bible. If we start with human nature and experience and then try to apply that to God, we risk creating a God in our own image. This approach can lead to both patriarchal and feminist ideologies that distort the true nature of God. Instead, we should listen to God's own self-witness, which comes to us through the analogies and metaphors provided in Scripture. Bernard Cook further explores this idea in his work, emphasizing that a non-patriarchal understanding of salvation must be grounded in the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. This means that our understanding of God should not be limited by human cultural norms, but should be shaped by the divine self-revelation that transcends human limitations. In the end, the metaphors and analogies used to describe God are not just about making God more relatable. They are about opening our hearts to the depth and breadth of God's love and care. By understanding God through these images, we can better grasp the profound and loving nature of the divine, and we can respond with a deeper sense of trust, gratitude, and obedience. This is the heart of the Christian faith, a relationship with a God who loves us with a love that is both maternal and paternal, and who calls us to a life of love and service.